This is the Marketing Podcast Network.
Welcome to Uncorking a Story, the podcast that introduces you to the rich world of storytellers who share their personal journeys, creative processes, and the stories behind their stories, one conversation at a time. I'm your host, Mike Carlin, and I'm thrilled to be part of your writing journey. If you're an aspiring writer, a literary enthusiast, or simply someone who believes in the transformative power of words, you've come to the right place. Every week, we'll pop the cork on the world of successful storytellers and give you a healthy pour of inspiration, insight, and empowerment. My mission is to help writers like you realize your full potential through the transformative and therapeutic power of writing. Whether you're just starting your literary voyage or looking to refine your craft, I'm here to provide you with the knowledge, inspiration, and encouragement you need to embark on your own storytelling adventure. So, are you ready to uncork your story and let your creativity flow? Uncorking a Story is about to begin. Sit back, relax, and let the transformative magic of storytelling whisk you away. Welcome to Uncorking a Story. Well, hey there, and welcome to another exciting episode of Uncorking a Story. I'm your host, Mike Carlin, and I'm so happy to have you with me as I uncork yet another great story. I want to remind you to please follow Uncorking a Story on all social media platforms, including Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, TikTok, and Twitter. You can find us at Uncorking a Story on all of those platforms. Now, if you only listen to Uncorking a Story as an audio podcast, that's not a bad thing, but I do encourage and invite you to please watch us on YouTube, as it's a great way for me to connect with other fans of the show. And I encourage you to do that. Go to YouTube, find us by searching Uncorking a Story, and then hitting subscribe. Really, it's a lot of fun reading your comments and engaging with you in the comments. And sometimes you guys engage with each other and get into arguments, which is always fun for me to see. Now, for you audio listeners out there, I have not forgotten about you. Please subscribe, rate, and review Uncorking a Story wherever you get your podcast. Now, today on the show, I have a very, very cool author named E.A. Aymar, also goes by Ed, but his author name is E.A. Aymar. And this was an interview that almost didn't happen. I reached out to his publicist earlier in the day to let her know that I had an after-hours work meeting that got scheduled over our interview, and I thought I had to cancel. And he had a very, my author, E.A., Ed, had a very tight schedule. He only had 30 minutes for me because he was doing a media tour. I recorded this on his launch day. So needless to say, he was a little bit busy that day. But fortunately, his publicist never got my message. My meeting ended early, and I was able to talk to Ed, who really, really fascinating author. He and I went down a few fun rabbit holes during this conversation. And one thing, though, that we spend a little bit of time talking about is lessons that we get from rejection. As writers, rejection really is part of the writing process. And I personally know how disappointing rejection is as a writer. But really, you can't let it stop you from, pursuing that dream you have to publish something. In fact, rejection and disappointments can really be our best teachers as writers. And actually, they can really be our best teachers in life in general. The important thing is to try and take away some kind of nugget of wisdom or insight that you can use to make your writing better. Now, this isn't always easy to do when you get that old form letter from an agent saying, thanks for your submission, tells you that you're not a good fit for, what he's looking for or she's looking for at that point in time, and then sends you on your way. But sometimes, sometimes agents who have, if you've moved them a little bit with your work, they will send you a little bit more feedback, some constructive feedback on why they aren't considering you at this time. And I really, would recommend to listen to that. Listen to that. There's some wisdom in there. There's some wisdoms that agents and publishers might give you when they're saying thanks, but no thanks. So pay attention to it. And another thing that Ed talks about in this episode is his reaction when his publisher recommended that he reconsider the title of his book. Now, this is something he's probably spent, a year or so working on, and someone comes along and says, the book's great, Ed, but you need to change your title. He could get defensive and say, screw you, no, I'm going to keep the title. It's my baby. But he didn't. He basically agreed with them, and he came up with a new title that was, from my point of view, 1,000 times better than his original. You'll hear about that story in this episode. And again, some people might take offense to such a suggestion, but Ed, very maturely recognized that his publisher knows more about what makes a good title than he does. And he was open to their suggestion. And the lesson there is, don't be afraid to kill your darlings. Listen to people who know what they're talking about. So there you have it. Again, my goal on Uncorking a Story is to help make you a better writer. So today's lessons are to learn from life's disappointments and be open to suggestions from subject matter experts. And now I ask that you be open to my conversation with E.A. Aymar. Multiple Anthony Award-nominated E.A. Aymar's essays have appeared in the Washington Post, the Washington City Paper, Publishers Weekly, and more. He's a former member of the National Board of the International Thriller Writers and is an active member of Crime Writers of Color and Sisters in Crime. He joins me today on Uncorking a Story to talk about his career and latest novel, When She Left, which has been called crime fiction at its best by New York Times bestseller Wendy Corsi Straub. Welcome to Uncorking a Story, E.A. Aymar.
Thank you so much. I've been looking forward to this, and I'm excited to talk with you, and happy to join your lineup of authors as well. So thank you.
I'm excited to have you here. And we're going to start where I always do, which is, where does your story as an author begin?
So really it started, I have a very typical background as a writer. I read growing up a ton. And then when I got to college, I took a couple of writing courses, and I'd always had a knack for writing. And then I learned sort of how difficult it can be, but also how fun. After college, I got a job at a political cable news company, and that meant, and I was answering phones. So people just called in and yelled at me. We were too conservative, we were too liberal, we were too middle of the road, everything. And so it was like, this was pre-internet comments. So I was essentially getting the phone version of internet comments. And I needed something that was, I needed a break from that. And I was like, I really loved writing. And I started doing it. And then for some reason, it stuck. And at that point, I started taking it seriously. And by that, for me, that meant writing 2 hours a day. And I've done that ever since.
Wow. So when was your first book published?
Yeah, so I started writing seriously in 97, and my first book didn't get published till 2015.
Okay.
I do not recommend my path.
Well, it's not a path that's uncommon. It's sort of taking a long time. And look, I talk to authors. Sometimes, I get one who says, you know what, first one out of the gate, a publisher bought it, without me having an agent. So I had to find an agent, which is absolutely the exception to the rule. Many times it is a marathon. It is not a sprint. But just bridge the gap for me between sort of starting that first one and getting the first one published. Like, what was going on in your life during that time?
Yeah, I mean, it was, there were successes along the way, right? There was enough stuff to motivate me. Finishing that first book and getting some enthusiasm from agents, but not having it picked up. The first book I wrote, which was finished in like 2004. And then after that, the second book I wrote got picked up by an agent with a very prestigious literary agency, but we couldn't sell it. And then we, mutually, on friendly terms, parted ways. And then it was, I decided, maybe I should teach or something. And I got a master's in literature, which just made me want to write more. And then, The Unrepentant came out a few years after that. And I found a agent who I loved working with. And that sort of, after that, I was on the right path. But there's a lot in that where there was, I remember like thinking like, oh, I want is one book published. Why is this so hard? So I'll never forget that. And I always feel like I'm playing with house money. Sitting on the other side of a table in a writer's presentation or signing or something. I'm always starstruck and happy to be there.
Yeah. So how did you stay motivated during that time? And what were some of those like wins that you had along the way?
Well, I was drinking.
Oh.
No. Which wouldn't be very uncommon, I guess, for a writer either. But no, I wasn't. I had part of it was I was reading a lot and I didn't know what I was doing. And that is so when you're when you're at that stage, and this is something I try to capture with one of the characters when she left, this early stage of like artistic discovery where you don't know the rules and you're learning it. And it's this kind of love that is really just like untamed, but it all consuming. It's like love in the early days of a relationship, where you can't keep your hands off each other. It's that kind of thing. And that was beautiful. That was enough to keep me motivated. And then the stuff I was reading, because I read everything. And reading good fiction makes me want to write. So those two things kept me going.
Yeah, so just kind of, it's so important to have wind in the sails along the way, because so many things can take wind out of our sails throughout the process. But like being persistent with it and staying motivated is it's so critical. Did you have like a good support network that you turned to like during this period of time? Did you have like other authors you were in a writers group with, or mentors that could really like pick you up when you were feeling a little bit down?
No, I didn't, and that's one of the mistakes I made. Part of it was because I didn't tell anybody I was writing for a very good reason. I wasn't in the early days. I wasn't having any success, and I didn't want people to keep asking me, "How's the writing going?" I was like, "This is going to be so depressing." So, and then I similarly didn't talk to other writers because I went to a couple of like early writing groups and stuff, and I met people like myself, and I didn't like where I was. I didn't need to see a reflection of myself in these, poor, desperate writers. So I wrote alone. And the only person who knew was my wife, who was my girlfriend at the time. And she was an amazing support. I think she put on a very brave face. I don't know if she believes me or not, but she admired my drive to that. And there's a point there, right? There's a point where you're chasing something, and it's persistence or pathetic, and you don't know which. You hope it's persistent, but you don't want to be that mocked singer on like a TV show who is a terrible singer and everybody knows it but that person. And you wonder, like, am I that person? Am I just not good at this and I can't see it because I'm too vain? Um, but I think a lot of it has to come from self-awareness. A lot of writing, right? Because you're not, you can, I read something and I have my idea of how it sounds. It's different when someone else reads it.
Yeah. Yeah, and it is a long runway between writing something and then getting some kind of validation from it too. I mean, validation comes in the form of finding the agent, getting a publishing deal, getting some positive reviews. But for many of us, that's a very long road, and it's
Yeah.
like you constantly wonder, and I do too. It's like, what I'm writing any good? I know that I like it, but is somebody else going to enjoy it? Not everybody else is me, thank goodness. And it's sometimes a little too early to even put feelers out for a chapter, which is something I rarely do. I mean, I never let anyone read anything that I'm writing until I think it's done and ready to be, queried or have a larger audience. But in contrast, I also do stand-up comedy, and I know immediately if something I wrote works or doesn't work because people are either laughing or they're not. So it's like this juxtaposition of like when the validation comes.
Yeah. That's fascinating. I've never thought about doing stand-up comedy, but I've thought about stand-up comics a lot, and the how terrible that must be. And you talk to, like you hear successful comics talk about it, and they're like, yeah, those early days, like, or there's like a real love they have for that, and a desire to return to the clubs and experience that instant feedback, and it just seems so terrifying to me.
Yeah.
I remember my very first writing workshop, and I remember wondering if I could go into the classroom, standing outside the hall with my story all rolled up and wondering, like, I don't think I'm ready for this. I don't feel like I can do this. And I was really surprised because at that point, writing wasn't that important to me, but something about that was so frightening.
Oh yeah, I mean, it takes a tremendous amount of vulnerability to go into a situation like that with something you wrote and share it with the world, because you don't know
Yeah.
what feedback you're going to get. But at the same time, you've got to be open to vulnerability as a writer because criticism is everywhere, and not just criticism, obviously praise is there too, but you're going to find somebody who doesn't like what it is you do, and they're not going to be shy telling you. Go.
Yeah.
Not that I recommend it, but go on Goodreads. You're going to find somebody who yeah, you could have 100 positive reviews, and then you get the one. Some idiot who's maybe jealous of you, or maybe honestly doesn't or like what you
Yeah.
did, or but it happens. It happens. But you talk about comics and going back to the clubs. Any big comic you've seen, with the Netflix special or the HBO special, they spent 20 years, doing, probably the first 5 or 6 doing open mics, and then, opening at clubs for larger people. And then maybe they're middling at some point, and then maybe 10 years into it, they're headlining. And then 10 years after that, they've got the special. But just like writers, sometimes it takes 20 years to build something, build up a career doing what you love to do. And, it sounds like for you, it took 20 plus years from, starting to write seriously to getting something published. I'm curious, like, what was it like when you heard from your agent or a publisher that, hey, look, we're going to pick this up, we're going to publish it? Like, what emotionally, what was that like for you?
It was it was overwhelming in some ways. And, getting, like I'd had, when I got my current agent, who's hopefully my agent for life, I was established enough at that point to, I think, I couldn't have had my pick of agents, but I knew enough and I'd been around publishing enough to know, like, okay, here's how I need to do it. And I wasn't as surprised that I got an agent at that point, but I'd really put in the work. And I knew the book was good with, I think, for me, that like moment where I was really blown away was, um, it was with No Home for Killers, the book that came out last year. And that book turned out to be, just between us and everyone listening, that turned out to be like, a bit of a divisive book, because it's very dark, and some readers loved it and some hated it, but there wasn't really a middle ground. And my editor told my agent, like, guess what, all caps, the New York Times is going to review your book. And I was like, well, shoot, that's not what I want. I was like, because I could take like negative reviews and, like, I got a great review for that book in Kirkus. I got a spiteful one in Publishers Weekly. I was okay with that because nobody reads those. Nobody reads Publishers Weekly except other writers or industry insiders. It's fine. The New York Times, though, I was like, no. And then the review came out. A friend had messaged me online and said, the New York Times loves your book. And I didn't even read the review. I grabbed my phone and I ran upstairs to my wife and put the phone in her face. And I was like, read it. She was like, what is this? But that was the moment where, like, I kind of lost consciousness.
Yeah.
I did not react coolly.
But you probably went out and you bought a fancy car, maybe a new house with that news, or?
Yeah, no, I think we went to Chili's.
Nice. You're known for your baby back ribs, and as my daughter tells me, their Dollaritas apparently are pretty good.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah,
Okay.
well, I've got college kids, so they're they penny pinch for the Dollaritas. Well, what can you share with us about when she left?
So it's a story about a young couple on the run from a group of criminals, because the woman in the couple, Melissa Cruz, has left her boyfriend for another man, and her boyfriend was a rising star in this organization. So they hire a reluctant real estate agent / hitman to find them.
That's an interesting combination.
Yeah, well, the thing is, with interest rates the way they are now, if you're a real estate agent, you need a second income. And it's either an Etsy store or a contract killer.
Yeah.
There's no other choice. It's one of those two.
Yeah, I mean, there's money in killing, from what I'm told, but certainly not without its occupational hazards.
Yeah, and it was fun writing him, because the character Lucky Wilson, like, I really wanted to write that character, but I was keenly aware that the reluctant hitman or the conflicted hitman is a comic trope, and I didn't want him to become a caricature. I didn't want a cartoonish person. I didn't want to be a joke because I really started to love this character. And I realized like he needs something authentic. And what he need, and I was like, what is he like sports? What's his thing? And I was like, that's not it. And then it hit me like it's his family. He's torn, but he needs to honestly love his family and genuinely and powerfully and deeply want to be a good husband and a good father. And that opened up a part of me that filled him out. And he became probably my favorite character in the book.
Yeah, it's interesting how, your antagonists, need to be human beings too. And you need to find something you can connect to. Even they could be do very despicable things. But if you don't build a little bit of, sense of empathy, even for the antagonist, then it's like, the reader needs to be vested in them too, right? And I think
Yeah.
I love I read a lot of Carl Hyacin because he does the whole like quirky mystery
Yeah.
with a lot of comedy, and it's always in Florida, where it was my home state. And there's always something despicable about his characters, but there's also something that you kind of like. Now, not that you root for them, but it's like, oh well, I see where they're coming at. They're doing bad things for maybe the right reasons, questionable reasons. But yeah, it's and not everybody takes that approach. Some people are just write pure evil characters, and it sounds like you don't.
I try to write nuanced characters, right? But I wanted with when she left, I really wanted to write, and this sounds kind of hokey, but I wanted to have authentic love. So between Jake and Melissa, I wanted to have a love story between them. A love story that involves some stabbing, but also, something that it has to be genuine because it has to be believable that Melissa would leave her boyfriend and risk all that for another man, and he would do the same. So that, they're that really informed that. And then Lucky was informed by the love for his family. And I was happy with that because I don't think the joy of love uh, is something that we see a lot in crime fiction. We see the dissolution of love. We see the ending of love and the havoc it can wreak, but not just that pure, that pure joy.
Yeah. Is there some dark comedy in this book?
Oh yeah, yeah. There's a lot of that, especially, and that's what Lucky serves, right? That's his purpose because he's so conflicted, and he's obsessed with Christmas villages, because and Christmas in general. It's just like his wife and daughter are like, your package is here, and he's like, it is, and it's the new Lemax Christmas Village catalog, and he's pouring through it, and his wife is like, look, they have a new one there, and to me, I love that because I remember my mom feigning interest, or actually not feigning, like supporting my dad for his boring ass hobbies. Like she was like, oh, that's great. And I was like, I love capturing that. So with Lucky, this hitman who has a very painstaking Christmas village,
Yeah.
was that he meticulously cares for. That there's comedy there, but hopefully it's also got a little bit of earnestness. Not too much, just a little bit.
Yeah, that is so dark though. I mean, this idea of somebody who's like big into Christmas and is also like a contract killer. It's I like that juxtaposition. It's it's kind of polar opposites. Kind of polar opposites there.
Yeah, and there's a lot with Lucky that, for him, like he doesn't know this, but right, Christmas Village is an idyllic thing that he can control. Right. And his family he opens the book worried that his wife's leaving him, and this is out of his control. And it is very discomforting for him. So having that lack of control, and I think I was thinking about it, and I wish I'd realized this before, but I was thinking about it today. He, as a real estate agent, for him, I think there's a pleasure he gets in showing empty houses. And I wrote that and didn't know why that was, but it felt right. And I realized today, oh, it's because his family, I think there's a fear there that his family is going to leave, and that empty house represents that. So he loses that kind of attraction to it.
Yeah.
If I'd known that, I would have written to that, but dang it.
That's all right. It's a subconscious at work.
Yeah, right.
a gift from your subconscious mind. So you've got obviously a female protagonist here with a male protagonist, and of course a couple of male antagonists. How is it writing from both points of view, from a male point of view and a female point of view?
All my books prior to this one were from a female point of view, and this is and I really wanted to do that. I wanted to capture that, but I was very conscious that I'm not going to do it as well as other writers are. I'm a big fan. Most of my favorite writers right now are women, and especially in psychological thrillers. And what they do, the insight they have with their characters and how they're able to build them out, I admire that. I don't have that experience. I don't have that lived experience, and I can't replicate it. So I don't try. I do try to make my characters authentic and realistic, the woman in my books. But I do it with third person. So there's a bit of a distance, and all of my early readers are women. My agent's a woman, my editor is a woman, and they are all they'll maybe a little too excited to call me out on any mistakes I make. you know? But I need that. They're waiting. Yeah. They're like, okay, that's that's not how that works.
That's right.
But that's great. I'm very happy about that. And I think you want to avoid the mistake that a lot of men make as writers, and women do too, but I see this more with men in this instance, where you don't want to show off. You don't want to be like, I am so insightful, let me show you ladies what cramps really feel like, and try and write that. That's not, nobody wants to hear that, and you're not going to do it very well.
No, not at all. Not at all. But yeah, it sounds like you've got the right approach for it. I once wrote a love scene in a book, and the feedback I got was, you don't know anything about women, do you, Mike? Like, well, teach me. Let me go back to the drawing board. What am I missing here? They're like, well, it was one of those things, and it was helpful feedback, but it was, you definitely knew a man wrote the love scene versus a woman, because we all have our different things that we look for, certainly in that regard. But it was certainly an eye-opening moment for me.
There's one thing, a big change in crime fiction that I love. It's that there's more. This is going to sound, I know how this sounds, but I'm very happy there's more sex in crime fiction now. And part of that is because it's always been, taboo. It's always like, okay, the camera fades away when the characters get in bed. But we, as crime fiction writers, are fine to write about murder and killing and death, but we can't write about, this very revealing aspect of character. And the people who are doing it now realize that, and they do it so well. It's informative, it's necessary, it's not extraneous material, and it's and I think it makes the book like fuller. I really admire the people who are doing that.
Yeah, and
I can't.
Yeah, I mean, look, and let's not, I don't want to say the elephant in the room, but the success of certain genre books, and 50 Shades of Grey is probably the best example I have for it. That sells a lot of books, and if you could do it in the right way, you'll get not only a better story, right, more well-rounded characters, but you'll get some buzz around it as well, and people might be talking about it, and maybe they'll reread that chapter a few times. Who knows?
Yeah, and it's also, it's just a big part of the human experience too. So if you're a writer and you want to write, beyond what your curiosity, if you're not writing, formulaic stuff every time, and I don't mean to put that down. I mean the same story, different times, which you get a lot of. Then you're gonna, I think those writers who shy away from that start to look into other things and other things that interest them, and that's not uncommon for them to go down that path.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to show, demonstrate that somebody is a selfish person, a great way to do that is showing them being selfish in a bedroom setting. That it's like the not the icing on the cake, but it's just another way of showing, as you point out, something about someone's character.
And there's writers now May Cobb is a fantastic writer at that. She's great in crime fiction. There's another writer who I cannot remember her name, and it's going to drive me crazy, but I occasionally review books for the Washington Post, and I reviewed her book, and it was my favorite of the year. Lindsay, I can't, but the book's Hot Springs Drive. It's her fourth novel. Fantastic, exploration of people and sex and how it changes them and how they use it.
You mentioned May Cobb. I had May Cobb on this show, I think last year or the year before. I can't remember.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, she's awesome.
Yeah, no, she was fantastic. I'm actually looking it up. July of 2022, My Summer Darlings.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, great conversation with May. But getting back to you, tell me a little bit about the title. I mean, it sounds like, you kind of gave me an overview of the plot a little bit. And obviously, she leaves one relationship to join another. As she's involved in another relationship. But how did this title come to you?
So this wasn't the original title of the book. The original title was Sunset Heroes, which I thought was really pretty, but didn't actually tie into anything with the book. So my editor was like, we met with marketing and they think you should change the title. And I was fine with that. I was like, I trust people outside of myself for the commercial aspects of the industry that I don't understand. So if they like a cover and they tell me that's the way it should go, that's fine. But for me, so I thought about when she left, when it's one of those things you realize, as you probably know, right? After you're writing, you can be blind to this stuff, but it was really, all of my, like I mentioned, I've always written from women's points of view. And then this book I wrote from the points of view of most of my protagonists were men, and they were men dealing with losing women. And it was about how these men are going to react to that. Lucky's worried that his wife is leaving him. Chris, who's the rising star in the criminal organization, he's lost his girlfriend. He doesn't react well. Jake, Melissa's boyfriend, is distant from his mother, and there's a separation there that really informs his relationship. So this is I wanted to write about men experiencing this, and not necessarily their emotions, but their reactions, because I don't think men always display or speak through their emotions. So I was hoping to capture that.
Yeah, I'd love that you were open to changing the title, based on feedback, because I think some people might either take offense to that, or just just say, no, this is my title, this is the book I wrote. And when did you realize that you were open to suggestions like that?
I think it was pretty early on. I think getting, that long path I took to writing taught me the importance of rejection and the importance of editing. So I was well aware as a writer, about editing a manuscript, but and seeing stuff that I didn't realize. And I was pretty open to having change from the editors. But part of that is because my day job's always been in marketing, and I work with graphic designers who know graphic design way better than I do. I trust them to know what the right way to do something is. So if somebody's an expert in their field, and the people that my publisher has are very good, I'm fine to defer to them, as long as it's not, offensive, as long as it's not completely wrong or misrepresentative. But otherwise, yeah, I'm fine. And I came up with the title. Had they come up with it, maybe I would have been more resistant. I would have been, even if it'd been the same one, but that helped.
Yeah. But even just hearing that, when she left, I could see it. You hear that, you could see it like unfold in front of you. Like, it's very visual to me. It also sounds like something that could be adapted to, the big or small screen as well. I mean, it's got that kind of a flow to it, if you will, versus what was the other one? Sunset
Heroes.
Heroes. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. And that all sounds like, to me, I kept thinking about like Sunset Boulevard, and I was like, well, is that, are people going to think this is like an LA book or something?
Right.
So the, yeah, I felt like this is more, I don't know, it kind of ties into books I like and titles I like that leave you kind of wondering.
Yeah. Well, very cool. Very cool. And I know today's the big publication day as we're recording this. So that's exciting. Congratulations on that.
Thank you. Yeah.
I do like to just, throw a couple of other questions at my guests, unrelated to reading,
Sure.
writing, or arithmetic. One
God.
way I like to get to know my guests a little bit more is through some pop culture questions. And I'm curious, when you were growing up, did you have any favorite TV shows, Ed?
Yeah, growing up. I mean, I was a Thursday night, you know, what was it? I don't they didn't call it must see TV, but whatever the
Oh,
Thursday
no.
night lineup.
If it was NBC, it was absolutely must see TV.
Was it back then?
Uh-huh.
Okay, good. Yeah, because it was for me it was, Cosby Show and then whatever they put in between between before Cheers and Night Court started.
Right.
Then I went through a phase which lasted, I think, like 2 summers because I could stay up late in the summer where I was obsessed with Dave Letterman.
Mm.
So I just thought that show was the greatest thing ever, and I would stay up late till I looked forward to it when I woke up, and then, but I think a lot of people had get that relationship with a talk show
Yeah.
where it speaks to them.
It's certainly much more irreverent, than the Tonight Show. The Tonight Show was like safe, and then
Yeah,
Letterman was like, it was like zany, it was edgy.
yeah,
I feel the same way about Conan O'Brien. Yeah, I loved Conan O'Brien. I listen to his podcast regularly. I think he's just
same
so
here.
funny and so fast.
Yeah,
But yeah, Letterman was great, and I'm also fascinated by that whole like battle for late night time period. When Jay got the Tonight Show, and then Dave went over to he went to CBS, right? Because they didn't have
yeah,
one, and he was sitting kind of second chair at NBC. But that's all fascinating to me.
same here. And it seems like it seems like overall most of the like when you hear comedians talk about it, they all really side with Letterman.
Yeah. Yeah, and the thing is, like, and Jay is, I mean, he's still doing stand up today. Every Sunday
Yeah,
night he's at the Hermosa Comedy and Magic Club. He still works the club. But it is like comedians of a certain generation will certainly gravitate towards Letterman. That's without a doubt. How about music? What did you like to listen to growing up?
I was. Uh, I still listen to the same music I did growing up, which I thought I'd outgrow. But I was a hip hop head. I listened to rap early on, and I think it horrified my parents. But they would let me listen or read whatever I wanted, which was great. But I still listen to rap for some reason. I thought by now I'm 49. I got to outgrow this at some point, but and I was actually thinking, like, I asked my wife, like, should we go to this concert? And I'm like, the rapper's older than I am. I mean, is that okay? But I don't know. There was a point though where I really got into jazz, and I wanted to listen to something that had that, kind of, I don't want to say a serious music, but sort of. And rap was a very natural lead into that. And jazz, I was obsessed with it. Jazz just was everything to me for a few years, and it still is to an extent, but I don't listen to it as much as I used to.
Yeah, I love jazz. I love just going to watch jazz. Not just even
Mhm.
listen to it. It's like a visual experience for me. I just love watching. I just love watching people play jazz chords on the guitar, like because I can't get my fingers to do those things that they do. Um,
Yeah.
but you mentioned hip hop. I remember back in the early '80s. First time I heard probably Run DMC, I was hooked. And I loved how they blended like rock, rock hooks into their music because everyone else was sampling the same like disco songs back then.
Yeah.
Like Chic's "Good Times" was in like at least three, early hip hop songs. But when Run DMC came out, I'm like, whoa, this is great. There's actually a great documentary, 3-part documentary on Run DMC. I think it's on Peacock right now. A little plug
Oh,
for that.
really? Huh.
It's called The Kings of Queens. It's fantastic. It's really, really good.
Oh, okay. Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, jazz. I actually am really good friends with a jazz musician, a woman named Sarah Jones, who's a local singer here. And when I do readings, often she'll she'll come and do a song during it or whatever. And I love working with musicians for that kind of stuff.
Oh, that's great. That's so cool. My cousin Mick is a big jazz enthusiast. He's written young adult fiction around, like young adult historical fiction, around jazz musicians. So he's got one
Oh wow.
about Louis Armstrong, I think called Travels with Louis. He's got one writing on Duke's Train about Duke Ellington. And it's actually really cool because his books have been adopted into school systems throughout the country, and
Oh, that's great.
it's teaching
That's
kids about
awesome.
jazz, which is awesome. Which is awesome.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I realized I plugged my cousin's book when I should be plugging yours.
I always plug other people's books when I should be plugging mine, so I am totally fine with that.
Well, as we wrap up here, I always like to end with sort of a reflective question, which is if you can go back in time and whisper some words of advice into your younger self, maybe it was that younger EA who 20 plus years ago was really starting to write seriously. What kind of words of advice would you offer to your younger self?
Wow, about writing?
Yeah,
Um,
about writing or even about like what life is going to be like in general.
uh, I would say, you know, I would tell myself to be more open about it. I was like I mentioned, I was very closed off. I imagined myself as Moses, and I was going to come out of a cave holding commandments, and everyone would gather around to see what I'd written. And when I came out of my cave, there was no one there. And I was like, you know what? I really should have made some friends during this time. And had I talked to other writers and done what I see aspiring writers at conferences doing, which is getting all the information they can, learning as much as they can, making connections, meeting people, my process would have been, a decade shorter, maybe.
Yeah.
And maybe not, but, and I can't fault the way I came up, but uh, I think that that's one thing I always tell writers is, make the connections, get feedback. Don't be afraid of it.
Yeah. It's yeah, it's something I hear a lot, the importance of connections and networking and, going to writers groups and conferences. Those are all worthwhile endeavors. But the other side of that coin for me is like your work comes out when it's supposed to. Like there's a reason why it took a longer time. There's a reason why like the stories that are coming to you now probably couldn't have come to you 20 or 25, 30 years ago. Because you've lived more life, you're a different person, you're open to more
Yeah.
things. And clearly you've had a tremendous amount of success. So
And yeah, and we don't publish till most writers don't publish till they're over 40.
mm,
So it's not a short game. It's not something for some people, like you said, it happens overnight. For most of us though, it's a slog. And I tell a lot of writers now, especially younger writers, who I mentor, like it's don't be afraid of this is part of the process. This is part rejection. You've got to learn how to handle rejection. You've got to get rejected. I was rejected. I know writers. We were all rejected by almost 100 agents
mm.
at times. It happens. It's fine. It's not fine, but it happens. And if you keep going, eventually that number will turn. But that's the key. That's such an important part of the process, and it's one that is really hard, I think, for writers to yeah, aspiring writers to realize.
Yeah, but the clue there is to learn from those rejections. And if you're fortunate
Yeah.
enough to get something beyond, the form letter, if you get a little bit of advice, or if somebody takes the time to say, "Hey, look, I like what you did. You've got a good voice. This isn't right for me." But if they're giving you something a little bit more that you could use to work with, that's even better. And take that advice.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, anytime you can get that, it's so valuable, and it may not. It usually doesn't lead to anything, right?
right.
It usually doesn't, but occasionally it does. That happened with No Home for Killers. It was I sent it out. I sent the book prior to that out to my agent sent it to the editor at Thomas and Mercer, and she turned it down. But she said, she said, show me, the next thing Ed writes. And you hear that a lot. My agent did. And, she was like, I've been waiting for something from him. So this is great. And then she wanted it. We gave it to her. We sold it to her in an exclusive, because, but then that was one of those things, one of those little moments that ended up meaning more than I would have thought.
Yeah. Well, this has been fantastic. Do you have a social media or a website you can share with the audience in case anybody wants to do a little bit more digging on you?
Yeah. You can find me the easiest way is my website. It's eaymar.com. And from there, I write every 3 weeks. I put out a newsletter called Crime Fiction Works about the latest and greatest in crime fiction. And you can sign up for that newsletter at that site.
All right. I will put that in our show notes. I will also put a couple
Awesome.
links to your books in the show notes. And if I track you down on social media, I'll even put that in the show notes so people can follow you that way as well. But Ed, thank you so much for dropping by and Uncorking a Story and letting me uncork yours.
That was great. I love talking with you. Thanks so much for this.
Thanks for listening to Uncorking a Story. If you'd like more information about today's guest or to find out more about Mike, go to uncorkingastory.com. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe, rate, and review us at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Tune in every week to hear Mike Carlin uncork a new story.